Welcome to the Library of Testimonies. We believe that testimonies are stories of personal and inspirational growth and a powerful witnessing tool that touches and transforms lives. We use the word library because these testimonies are presented topically, which lets you navigate and relate to what you may be currently experiencing in your life. Just so we're clear, believers use the term testimony to mean sharing their story of how they became a Christian and how God changed their life through a personal and intimate relationship with Him. Regardless of how ordinary or spectacular you think they are, the testimonies are about God's character through our eyewitness accounts. It is our sincere hope that by listening to these testimonies, you will experience the same power of the Holy Spirit that moved in the lives of others and is available to you. Also, you will quickly realize that whatever you're going through, you are not alone. Though the testimonies you're about to access include the account of a person's salvation experience, it shouldn't end there. God continues to work in every person's life, and that ongoing relationship should continue to elicit future testimonies. Who knows? Perhaps one day, even yours.
Okay, hello. My name is Roy, and after a good long time of thinking about this and praying about this, I'm ready to share. Starting at my earliest memories, the first thing I remember as a child was my mother in the morning sending me to my bedroom to wait for Dad to come home to punish me. I don't remember what I did, but I do remember spending a whole day sitting on my bed waiting for Dad to come home. And when he got home, he beat me pretty good. I had a little wooden toy wagon that had blocks in it, and he picked that up and broke it on my butt. And so I basically grew up being pretty much terrified of my father. We did not have any kind of a relationship at all other than that. I had the misfortune to have to sit next to him at the dinner table, and if I didn't remember to sit up straight, he would stick me in the side with his fork. And that's how he taught me to sit up. And this, I remember as a young teenager, he would slap me around quite a bit, and it always broke me up, and I would cry. But I remember at this one point, he slapped me pretty hard, and I didn't cry. Oh, I was really proud of myself. I gave him a dirty look, and he slapped me again, and that was when my terror of him kind of turned to hate. And I always sort of felt as a young child that I was pretty much on my own. I started playing the violin in second grade, and neither one of my parents ever once came to any of our concerts. I started swimming as a sophomore in high school, and I didn't even know how to swim. My father came to the first swim meet, and I did terribly, and he never came back again after that. But by the time I got to college, that was where I learned the difference between swimming and competing. And I actually got pretty good. Played water polo and swam, and actually made it to the 1964 Olympic trials I didn't make it, but at least I was excited about that. It wasn't really until City College that I knuckled down and started to work in school. I was pretty much an average student in high school, but in City College, Viet Nam came along, and all of a sudden I realized I had to get good grades or I was going to get drafted. So I started working for the first time in school, and it did a lot better. But I realized no matter what, I was going to get drafted anyway, so I volunteered.
So if I could, let me jump in here just for a second, Roy, because we just spanned probably, 18 or 19 years so far. Were you exposed to church or religion during these years? Did you know anybody in your extended family? Did you know anyone that maybe was a Christian or religious?
My mother, I think, was raised Catholic. I have no idea what his relationship might have been with church. What I do know is that as young kids, every Sunday, Dad would pile us, the three of us, into the car and drop us off at the Methodist church.
Okay.
And then come back 2 or 3 hours later to pick us up. I suspect that was so Mom and Dad could have some private time together.
Okay.
But
so your perception, even as you started to mature, what was your perception of God or a God? Or
well, my goodness, to be honest with you, I really didn't think about it much.
Okay.
That didn't happen, I'm embarrassed to say, until the night.
Yeah, well, I'll let you continue the story till you get to that point. But where I was interested in, just with the issues with parents and Dad, that what refuge did you have, if any? So it sounds like right up to the point of City College and then the draft. So Please continue.
I had my basic at Fort Polk, and then I went to school at Fort Sam Houston. I was supposed to go to dental lab school, which is what the Army promised, and that didn't happen. The first thing that I did was they sent me to combat medic school, and as soon as I finished that, they sent me to dental assistant school. And I finished that in the 96th percentile. I felt pretty good about that. And the day after that, I got orders for Viet Nam as a combat medic.
Oh, boy.
But we formed up as a group, a mobile KJ team in Kentucky. And we loaded all of our equipment onto a train. And then we flew to Texas, and then to California, and there we got on a C-130 to fly to Vietnam, and that was quite a trip. We had several different places where we landed, and every time we landed, something broke on the plane. So anyway, we were basically in air over Vietnam, which was a real nervous time. And our orders got changed. So I think this was the first time that I realized that God was intervening in my life. Instead of going to Vietnam, we wound up going to Bangkok, Thailand, and he took over a dental clinic from the Navy. And that was, my goodness, from being in the jungle to being billeted in a hotel was quite a nice change. But I had the misfortune to become the assistant to a Captain Pazatek, who was the only oral surgeon in Southeast Asia. And I could not stand him. He was, in my opinion, he wasn't clean. But if enlisted man was hurt, they would usually fly them into our clinic in Bangkok, and we would do the surgeries there. But quite often, if someone from a colonel or a general was hurt, they would pack us up and fly us into them. And at one point, we landed in this compound and were doing surgery on a colonel. And all of a sudden, the compound was attacked. And mortars were coming in, and we were in an underground area, and dirt and sand were falling down. And Captain Positek told me, go ahead and close up. He was going to pack up our gear. So I closed up, and when I went to go back with him, he was gone. Two of the other medics were killed that night, and so I became their medic. And boy, I was not prepared for that. All of us were scared. You never knew when or where anything was going to happen. We would go out in the mornings to set up an ambush, and what they did was they would go out at the night and set up an ambush, and so it was just a question of who was going to stumble into who first. But it was a real life-changing time. We were all pretty scared. But fortunately or unfortunately, one of the world's finest marijuana grew wild everywhere you went, and it wasn't long before I joined in on that. And I hate to admit it, it really helped. It took away a lot of the fear. It helped to relax us. But that was the start of something that didn't end until 1981. After my tour of duty was finished, I was flown back home. Oh, wow. I skipped a whole bunch of important stuff. Before I was shipped over, I met Margaret. I was on a 9-day leave before I was shipped overseas, and I met her that first night. And boy, it was love at first sight or lust at first sight. I don't know what. But we were inseparable for those whole 9 days. And she wanted to get married, and I was so afraid I wasn't going to come back. I didn't want to do that. But the whole time I was gone, she wrote to me almost every single day. And we got to know each other through the mail. And when I came home, she met me at the Fresno airport. And that was a very memorable moment in my life. And then we went home to my parents' house, and they were all ticked off because I thought I was going to surprise them, and they didn't like that one bit. And their feelings towards Margaret were not very pleasant either. So I wound up staying with them until I was posted at Letterman Hospital in San Francisco. And I worked there in the dental lab. And that was a very rewarding time. I got close to an awful lot of the wounded men, and we got to do some really beautiful restorative work. It was really a nice time. During my time in Thailand, an awful lot of the enlisted men that would come in, I made friends with, and I was staying in a pretty nice hotel suite And so quite often I would invite them to come and stay with me. I would wash their clothes and try to make them feel welcome, and took them out on the town. Boy, I'm sorry. I hope I'm not messing this up.
No,
Well,
you're fine.
Let me just tell you this while you're getting your thoughts together, my brother. First of all, thank you for your service. And second of all, being a Viet Nam veteran, the words that always need to be spoken are welcome home.
Well, that isn't what happened when I got back, I'll tell you. They spit at me in the San Francisco airport. It was really a mess.
It's sad.
But, let's see.
Was Margaret with you in San Francisco?
No.
Okay.
No.
And were you still in the military when you went up there?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so you finished your tour, but you stayed in the military.
Well, my 3 years
It
wasn't
was
up.
3 years. Okay,
Yeah.
I see. It was
I
just
wound
1
up-
year overseas and then 2 more.
Well, actually,
stateside?
because of an injury, I was over there about 18 months. But then I came home, and I had my last, 9 months at Letterman Hospital.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, man.
Well, that's where you left off, is the hospital. So,
Margaret and I did get married in November of 1968. I was still in the service, and we wound up getting an apartment in San Francisco, and I would commute back and forth to the base. I had a real drug problem. I tried just about everything there was to try, every kind of pill, LSD, and I absurdly thought for many, many years that I was still in control of my habit. But I was not me. I felt like I had demons. And as time went on, I lost more and more control of myself. And I started to act crazy. I did some awful things. I said some awful things. And finally, I cheated on my wife. And in 1981, it all came. I lost control of everything, and it all came out. And I was immediately kicked out of home. And Margaret told me she hated me. She would never, ever be able to believe me or trust me or love me again. And man, she was a real toughie. And I spent the next 3 months living with my mother and father again, which was a real joy. And I kept trying to find work. I had spent the last 10 or 12 years working in grocery stores. That's what I did when I was going to college on the GI Bill, and by the time I finished, I realized I didn't want to be a teacher, and so I just stayed in the grocery business. But I went to several different grocery stores and had interviews, and the grocery business was just like a big clique. Everybody knew everybody. And I had gotten fired for stealing. And it was so stupid. The whole time I worked for anyone, I never stole a thing. But it was almost Christmas time, and I didn't have any money, and I took a pair of roller skates home. And I got caught, and the next day they asked me to come into the office, and I totally broke down and told them the truth about everything. And they were very, very kind. They did not report me to the police. They did not say why they fired me, which kept me out of jail probably, and allowed me later on in life to still find work. But that time away from home and living with my parents was probably the most miserable time of my life. It just got to the point where I was so miserable. Ending my life just seemed like a much easier option than going on. And so one night in December of 1981, I walked out into this middle of this park that was a short distance away from my parents' house. It was raining, and I was crying, and I fell down on my hands and knees, and I started to pray. And I asked God if He would please tell me what it was I had to do, if I could put my life back to rights. And in an instant, I heard this very loud voice. And God said to me, "Roy, you have to learn how to become a totally honest person." And that was it. But my whole life from 1967 to 1981 had been a lie. I was so embarrassed about my drug problem. I lied and hid it from everyone. And you can't do that without becoming a pretty terrible liar. So when God said that to me, it just floored me. I mean, there was just absolutely no question about what it was and where it came from. And it was just like someone took a blindfold off of my eyes. All of a sudden, for the first time in my memory, I could see my priorities in the right order. I knew I wanted to save my family. So I jumped in my truck and I drove home and woke Margaret up, and I told her I had something I had to tell her. And so I came in the house and I totally spilled my guts about everything to her, including what had happened to me that night. And she told me to get the hell out of her house, you damned liar. She was tough. But anyway, the next day I had another job interview at Foodland. And I went in to meet a man by the name of Wathen. I walked in and I introduced myself, and he said, "I know who you are." So I spilled my guts to him. I told him that I had been a drug addict for I don't know how many years, and that I had been a liar, and I had done all kinds of really bad things. But last night, I had an experience where God spoke to me. And I told him, I said, "I'm looking for someone, excuse me, who will give me a chance to start my life over. And he said, okay, you're hired. And so just like that, God made it very clear to me that by being honest, things were going to turn around.
Amen.
And so I worked for him as a bagger in several of his stores until I completely ran out of money. And Margaret, we had sold everything we could sell in order for her to keep paying the house payments. And so I went to him and I told him, I says, I'm at the end of my rope. If I can't start earning more money, I'm not going to be able to keep my home. And he said, okay, you're a journeyman clerk. He put me right back up to where I was. I'm sorry. And I was afraid I was going to do this. But anyway, because I had a job and I was making enough money to pay the bills, I came to Margaret and I told her that if she would let me come home, I would support her. And she told me, get out. But after a few days, she thought about it and she called me up and asked me to come and talk with her. And so I did, and we came to an arrangement. She would let me come home if I would support her and the kids, because she decided she had to go to school and get an education and get a job where she could make enough money to support the family, because she couldn't depend on me. And so I promised her that if she would let me come home, I would support her. And if at any point in time we got to a place where she couldn't handle it anymore, all she had to do was say so and I would leave. Well, it took her 5 years, but she graduated with high honors and became a dental hygienist. And that 5 years was a real growing time for me. I found a church, which I desperately needed. And I would go there every Sunday and every Wednesday, and it was like medicine for me. But living there was like I had an axe hanging over my head. I never knew, well. But anyway, when after 5 years, when she graduated, excuse me, I skipped something important. After I started going to church at People's Church for several months, I asked her if I could take the kids. And she said, okay. So I started taking the kids, and they loved it. And after several more months, I asked her if she would go with me. And she said no. She had been raised in the College Church of Christ. And to them, leaving to go to another church was blasphemy. They would literally kick you out. But after a few more months, she said okay. And so we finally started going to church together as a family. It was really nice. And she also came to love the church there. And we went there for 38 years. But at the end of that first 5 year period at home, and I know I'm messing this up, I'm sorry.
Oh, you're good.
On a Christmas day, the kids were out opening their gifts, and Margaret told me that my gift was too big to wrap and it was in the bedroom. And so she took me back there and closed the door. And she put her arms around me and hugged me and kissed me and told me that she loved me. And that was the first time in 5 years. And from then on, things began to get better. I had a series of jobs. Foodland went out of business after I'd been there for a couple of years. I went to work at a Food World, and after a year they went out of business. And so I finally decided, well, I found some other jobs. I was delivering bread for a while, and then I got a job delivering laundry for a laundry linen company. And that job tore me up. I wound up having to get both knees replaced and my left shoulder replaced. It was a lot of really heavy labor. And I hurt my back and got laid off. And by the time I recovered from a back injury, I told them, okay, and they told me, you're too old, we're not going to take you back. So I started looking for another job. And I had a job interview with a company called Angelica. And they were another laundry and linen company, but they delivered expressly to medical facilities. And when I went to the interview, it turned out that the man interviewing me was another Viet Nam vet, and we just hit it right off. And I wound up getting the job, which I thought was driving a truck, and it turned out they were looking for a salesman. And so I wound up getting a job signing up new business for the company. I had my own office, my own computer, my own car, credit card for the company. It was just crazy. It was like a dream come true. And I loved it. And I was so good at it. Every year I exceeded what they were asking me to do. But anyway, the company had this big shakeup, and they started firing all the older people, the experienced people. And they fired me. But the people in the local plant, they loved me and they didn't want me to go, and they offered me a job as a driver, which I grabbed. And so I worked for them as a driver for several more years until I finally hurt my back again, and I decided to retire. All during those years, Margaret would buy me woodworking tools, here and there, little things. And by the time I retired, I had quite a garage full of tools, most of which I didn't really know how to use properly. And so she gave me a little cutout from the newspaper, and it was an advertisement for joining the San Joaquin Fine Woodworkers Association. So I did, and they were wonderful. They offered classes and taught you how to use tools safely, and I'm still a member. But a couple of years ago, Margaret started to fall. She kept falling, and 2 or 3 times she hit her head. One time on the concrete, really bad. And I took her to the hospital, and there was no fracture. But the falling continued. So I took her to our regular doctor, and he sent us to a neurologist. They did an MRI, and they found that Margaret had a brain tumor. Fortunately, it was not malignant, but it was attached to a nerve that controlled the right side of her face. So we found a good surgeon, and he did a surgery and removed the tumor, but Margaret wouldn't wake up. She was in the ICU for 2 weeks on a ventilator in a coma. I might have told you about this. One night I decided to sneak her dog into the hospital. And I did that. And when I laid that little dog on her bed, Margaret woke up. And the nurses in there, everybody started crying. It was really, really a wonderful moment. But Margaret, from then on, steadily began to recover, and a few weeks after that, I was able to bring her home. But Margaret had changed. She had always been a very strong, tough person. And what she did was she took all of the abuse and the lies and the pain and the hurt and bottled it up inside. She found some place inside where she could shove it, and she slammed the door shut and never dealt with it. But when I brought her home from the hospital, her Xena was gone. And all of a sudden, things started pouring out. And I've got to tell you, the last couple of years have been pretty awful. We're reliving things that happened 45 years or more ago. And I hate to, things that I had buried are all having to come back out. And so lately it's been a very tough time for us. But this November we'll be married 54 years. Yeah. And I have to give her all the credit for that. But here we are. So.
Well, I'm no doctor, Roy, but I'm going to tell you straight up. She had a brain tumor, and all these things are happening that she's now bringing up again since she came out of that coma. But that's not what I really want to focus on, because when you said you guys for 38 years went to this church together and you loved the church, where in there did you start having a personal relationship with Jesus?
Yes.
And you came to know him? And how about Margaret?
Margaret was already a Christian. She had been a Christian most all of her life. In fact, before that night that we had the discussion about me coming back, she'd had quite a talk with God. She asked him what she should do. And God told her that he, above all, honored marriage. But he absolutely understood her position. And if she wanted to separate, he would understand and wouldn't hold that against her. But if she decided to keep the family together, he would be with her always and teach her things that she would never otherwise learn. And so she made the decision to keep the family together because of that discussion.
Well, she sounds like she's a strong, honest woman and forthright to you. But I want to talk about you for a second, brother. You said something that was so important. God spoke to you. And you said that you were a druggie, you were a thief, you were a cheater, all these things. And yet God spoke to you. And I think that's so awesome, because there's a lot of guys that didn't do those things, but God has never spoken to them. They can't say that they've had that beautiful, intimate relationship where God had actually spoken to them. I mean, you said you had no doubt. It was audible. You knew it was God. And that's awesome, because the father figure you had in the flesh was nothing like the father figure you have in the spirit, our creator and such. So,
well, and it was at your lowest moment, right?
Yeah.
Of your whole life so far. And it sounds from your description, the arc has been positive because with his strength, you became an honest person. And And you take it on the chin sometimes when you're honest, or the consequences are going to be there, but eventually that fades away because you attract honest people and you're around. And because you're honest, you attract that.
Once again, I left out something critically important. During all those years that I was on drugs, I was embarrassed about that. And I must have tried hundreds of times to quit. Sometimes I could even go for a week or two. Once I even went for a few months. But I always came back to it. But that night was the end of it. I've never touched another thing since that night.
Praise the Lord.
And it wasn't hard. There was no withdrawal, nothing. It was just gone.
And your explanation for that is what?
Oh, God took it away.
Exactly.
Before you were planted in the soil that was just in the rocks, so it was short-lived. But now God took you and planted you in the good soil, and He planted you. He watered you. He's grown you, brother.
No, I know. No one will ever be able to convince me that there isn't a God.
And I don't think I caught earlier. You both have kids.
Yes.
How many children do you have?
We adopted a daughter.
Okay.
We tried for 5 years to have children and couldn't.
Okay.
So we adopted a daughter. And about 8 or 9 months after that, we decided to adopt another. And Margaret got pregnant.
Well, there you go.
Yep. And so I have...
You're blessed from all directions.
Yep. Yeah. No, I knew when I said that I wanted to save my family, it wasn't just Margaret.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. Well, the story is just very compelling. It's a lot of life, right? And a lot of moments, and then not necessarily smooth sailing. You talked about your job and those struggles, and living life to be better. And people were put into your life to offer you the job, to forget your past, because you're an open and honest person. And I know now, since I know you a little bit through our church, that you're open and honest in how you interact with all of us. And I know that you're in a healthy church, Bible-believing church.
I do too.
That makes a difference, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Right. The challenges of those truths that we hear, and then having each other to lean on to live that life.
Well, there's one last thing I want to say.
Okay.
Am I taking too much time?
Well, go ahead and wrap up. That's great.
This is getting this all out is something that I've been thinking about for a long time. I know that God has wanted me to do this. For a long time, I was afraid. And then I realized that's just Roy's old selfishness. I didn't want to be embarrassed. And then I began to worry about Margaret. I didn't want her to be exposed again. Mm-hmm. But as I began to have a relationship with the Father, I knew I had to do this. And so I hope I haven't blown this. I wanted to do this right. But more than anything, these last 2 years have shown me of all the sins, of all the terrible things I did, breaking my vows was the worst. I completely dishonored my wife, and I broke her heart. And to this day, she is still in pain and suffering for that. And all of this for a few moments of pleasure. And it was not worth it. And it wouldn't be worth it for anyone else. And if there's anyone out there who is thinking about making that same mistake, don't do it. Think about years down the road how you're going to feel about yourself. I know, especially since it's been brought to the foreground lately, Margaret remembers everything. All the bad words, all the bad deeds. You can get a memory like an elephant. But I was terrible.
One of the things, Roy, is all of those things, you being terrible, has been forgotten under the blood of Christ. And those sins have been, as far as the east to the west, it's not remembered.
Well,
and
maybe God doesn't remember it, but Margaret does, and I do.
I understand.
And I can't, there's a part of me that is still so embarrassed about that.
Mm-hmm.
And there, every day I live with that, and this is what I don't want anyone else to have to go through.
Agreed. And I appreciate you saying those words, in closing for sure. And for you, be assured, you at least have 3 brothers here that are on your side, as well as, other men. So know that, and we'll always be supportive of you.
Amen.
But you're very brave to come up on a microphone and spill the beans about your life. It's an incredible life. What you've experienced, the hard things, the real things like a war. I'm not oriented to that at all, but it's amazing that God had pulled you through all of those things and then spoke to you, as Chip said. It's incredibly special. So live in that victory and know that you're a new creation, and you can have a new look on life and into all these trials that are right here today, but we're with you. And I wanted to thank you for coming tonight.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to be hopefully encouraged by the testimonies of those who've encountered Christ. May you never lose hope that you too can experience the reality of God's presence in your life. Continue to seek Him, and we pray that in fellowship with Jesus, you might experience that same life-changing joy. You may be asking yourself, where do I begin? We encourage you to find a Christ-centered, Bible-teaching church. May God guide you and bless you mightily as you continue in your search for Him. And know this, the change in your life will be your greatest testimony of your relationship to Christ.